I will go off and on for visual on me tonight, video.
And we are live on YouTube right now.
All right.
Thank you, Michelle.
Sounds good, Nancy. Thanks.
Deanne, do I need to read the virtual opening for this? Or just say this is the first of 2 public meetings, maybe just that?
Yes, that would be perfect.
Okay. I will do that then. Okay, I have 6:30 straight up. Are we about ready to go?
Yep, we are live and recording. Ready when everybody else is.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Welsh. I'd like to welcome everybody to our Governing Board study session. It is 6:30 on Tuesday, August 25th. This is the first of 2 public meetings we will be holding this week to discuss attendance boundary changes for elementary school 33, Wildfire, Fireside, and Boulder Creek Elementary Schools, as well as Explorer and Mountain Trail Middle Schools. And more information can be found on our website at www.pbschools.net/ES33. And we have been receiving comments, and certainly there are many ways you can submit comments regarding the potential realignments to us, and some may be read during the meeting. And with that, I'm calling the meeting to order, and may we have roll call, please? I'm sorry, Pledge of Allegiance first, please. And Dr. Skidmore, would you please lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Skidmore. Now may we have roll call, please?
Dr. Skidmore?
Aye.
Mrs. Matura?
Here.
Here. Mrs. Greenberg?
Here.
Mrs. Case?
Here.
And Mrs. Bacon?
Here.
Thank you very much. We're going to get right into our discussion items, and I will turn it over to Dr. Welsh.
All right, thank you, President Greenberg. So just a little bit of a brief intro here, and presenting for us tonight, we'll have Ms. Felton, who led up the committee for our boundary recommendations. She'll walk us through some of that, as well as We have with us tonight Rick Brammer, who's our demographer, who does all of our demographic projections. And so we're going to start with a bit of information regarding some of the demographics and the demographics report, the work and the process for the boundary recommendations, and the maps that are the draft proposals there. Following which we'll have an opportunity for some questions, discussion from the board in particular. And then what we'd like to do, obviously, since this is a virtual meeting, we have been collecting feedback via an online form. As you guys all know, we've been receiving lots of comments via that form, and so we've shared all of those with the board. We'll provide a brief summary of some of the things that we have seen in the comments, and then just have any additional remarks and discussion from the governing board and adjourn. I will also mention, just for those of us who are with us in the public, of course, the presentation that you'll see tonight is currently on our website at that URL that President Greenberg just shared, pvschools.net/ES33. And our form for feedback remains open. It will remain open through our meeting coming up Thursday and actually beyond, if there's any comments after that meeting. And so for those in the public, if there are additional questions, comments, that want to be shared, they can again go to that website there and add some comments or questions via that form. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Felton, who can start the presentation and walk us through some of the information regarding the work of the Boundary Committee and some of the demographics.
Okay, Laura, before you start, I just want to remind everybody, if you're not on, please mute, because I don't know about everybody else, but I'm seeing things sort of jump around based on whose mic is picking it up the most. So I appreciate that, and I will turn it over to Mrs. Felton.
Thank you. Can we start off with me asking, can everyone see the screen of the presentation? Great.
Yes.
Thank you so very much. So good evening, Mrs. Greenberg, Governing Board, Dr. Welsh, Cabinet, and the PV School community. This evening's meeting is in compliance with Arizona Revised Statute 15-341, Section 37. It's a pleasure for me to present the recommendations and work of our Boundary Committee. So let's talk a little bit about where we are going this evening. This presentation will cover the process that PV Schools uses for the development of boundary change recommendations. We'll review some of the data utilized by the Boundary Committee in making its recommendation, and then we will present the recommendation itself, as well as the associated maps. Okay, so for those of you who are familiar with how the collaborative process works here at the district, this boundary setting process isn't going to be very surprising to you. Additionally, this process does meet the requirements of the state as well as governing board policy. It begins by the superintendent calling for a committee and setting the purpose for the committee. In this instance, the need was first driven by the building of a new elementary school, affectionately called at this point Elementary School number 33, or you will hear it called ES33, and it is located in the Sky Crossing development. We'll talk more about the defined committee purpose in just a moment. Stakeholder groups provide names of participants for this committee, usually of those who are impacted by the issue. And we'll be reviewing that committee makeup in just a moment. The committee meets, reviews, and requests data before developing a recommendation, which are presented to the governing board. If the governing board wishes to continue the process, public meetings are held to present the recommendations as well as to receive feedback. So that's where we are in the process this evening. Ultimately, the governing board must adopt any boundary changes or any boundaries actually within the district. So that's kind of an overview of the process. Talking specifically about the committee itself and the process that it went through, this group met 4 times between January and February. Who knew that we would just sneak in before the world ceased to have large public meetings, but we did get our work done. We reviewed enrollment data, demographic data. We looked at maps. We all drove around the communities and looked. One of the next steps we did, though, was we did develop these guiding principles for setting boundaries. And we'll go through those in just a moment. And we did develop recommendations to address the attendance boundaries. Okay, so let's talk about that committee purpose that the superintendent charged us with. And so this committee was charged with examining all the K through 12 school boundaries north of the 101, including a review of the demographic projections and its effect on the opening of elementary school number 33. So that really was the thing we had to walk away with, was what will be the attendance boundaries for the new elementary school? Okay, first of all, I do want to thank all those committee members who participated in this process. If we were in a live meeting, we'd ask everybody to stand up, and we thank you all for all your work. So I do thank you for that, even though if you want to take a stand up right in front of your computer, we'll all feel that for you. But this group of people, I have to say, really took their charge seriously, asked for lots of data, challenged each other with questions. It was a really nice process. So the folks that you see listed here do represent many of the schools. They represent, let me read the list here, Wildfire, Fireside, Boulder Creek, Greyhawk Elementaries, as well as a parent from specifically the Sky Crossing community. There may have actually been two. Mountain Trail and Explorer Middle Schools represented, as well as North Canyon and Pinnacle High School were all represented. It was a really nice mix of individuals. And I do want to point out that many individuals on this committee didn't just represent those schools, they represent multiple things. So they may be a community member, but they also had students who attend our schools. That's just kind of how our committees frequently run. Typically, we have an equal balance between the different stakeholder groups, but because of the subject matter, we did choose to have more parents and fewer administrators on this committee. So I want to thank all of those folks for all of their work.
Ms. Felton, this is Susan Matura.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure who that was.
Sorry, yes. Can you go back a slide and can you just explain what all the different acronyms are for anyone who might not know what all those meant?
Goodness.
Thank you.
Thank you for so much for mentioning that. I do apologize. So that's embarrassing. UPC is the United Parent Council. Those were the parents on the committee. Community members are selected generally by the superintendent. The superintendent does have community members and business members within the community that participate in different folks. And so those were the individuals. So we have someone from Paradise Valley Community College, from a church whose name is totally escaping me right now.
Oasis Family Church.
Thank you, the Oasis, as well as someone from Honor Health. The COA is Central Office Administrators. Those are folks who are administrators of departments not over specific buildings. So we had someone here from transportation and someone from the community education program, since there is anticipated to be pre-K kinds of programming at ES 33. Next up, we have the principals, who are the principal at Paradise Valley Principals Organization. So we have 3 principals from the area. PVEA is the Paradise Valley Educators Association, so that's our teachers. And the PVSEA are the support folks, Paradise Valley Support Employees Association. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and a little too far there. Sorry about that, everybody. Okay, so the guiding principles. So as you see, the committee did come up with these guiding principles. They utilized these to help them make a decision. So all of these principles were considered as we were looking at different options, and they really made an effort to kind of balance them, but they aren't in hierarchical order. It's just the things that we did look at. One thing we really want to focus on that you'll see through the presentation is looking at keeping neighborhoods together, so not splitting a neighborhood. We did look at transportation as well as grandfathering issues, and a lot of that has to do with transportation. So it's We know transportation can get very expensive. We have limited resources, both in the terms of the number of drivers as well as buses. We did look at distance from school, length of time that a student would be spending on a bus. We did look at transportation issues not bus related, so safest walking, how would students get to our schools? We tried to be forward thinking about growth and what was going to happen. I have to tell you, we really struggled with this. You know, we don't want to make changes for our families in the future, but it's very hard to know what is going to happen with development. Much of the empty land up in this section is actually owned by the state land department. And we have almost no say on what happens with that, as well as what parcels they will release for construction. And as we've seen in the past, the economy really is a major driver in those kinds of construction. So we did look to try to balance school enrollments. We always look at viability of economics and being financially responsible. That's something we always look at in our district. We did look at feeder systems. That was one we kind of struggled with. That's always a challenge when you look at school boundaries and what schools feed into the next grade levels up. And we did also want to make sure that we were taking into account open enrollment and what we see in terms of trends for open enrollment. So those were kind of the guiding principles that we looked at. And now I'm going to turn you over to Mr. Brammer, who will talk a little bit about his work.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
We can. Thank you.
This is the sort of our base map that we use for planning in the district. We have data for these small area geographies going back to about 2005. And the area that we're really concerned about, just want to make sure everybody kind of understands the lay of the land, is that we're looking at the area north of the Loop 101, across the district west to east, which is 16th Street all the way over to Scottsdale Road. So right about where you see the word Fireside, just below that, that's where the 101 cuts across the district.
Can I make a point just a moment? Because it actually goes over to Pima, not to Scottsdale Road. And I think that's a big confusion right now. So I just want to make sure we clarify that without moving forward. Thank you.
I apologize. I just misspoke on that one. I do apologize for that one. Okay. So then when you're looking at the map itself, the purple lines are the elementary attendance areas as they are today. And the colors that are associated on the map are actually the middle school attendance areas. And so up there north of the 101, essentially we have 6 elementary schools, 2 middle schools and a high school, Pinnacle. And the Boulder Creek, Wildfire, and Fireside attendance areas were essentially the elementary attendance areas were the focus basically of this work. But when we're doing that, we have data that goes clear down to the quarter section level. So every time you see those little red numbers in there, we have extensive data about who lives there, where they go to school, and you know, even about alternative providers in those particular areas. So this gives you the lay of the land. It shows that that the Mountain Trail Middle School attendance area is what we've always called the horseshoe. That is essentially goes up and around the outside of the district to the north and to the east, with the exception of an area up off of Tatum Boulevard that is always attended. The Explorer attendance area, which is shown here in light blue. Next, please. So this is a really interesting area north of the 101, and as Ms. Felton pointed out, most of the land up here that isn't already developed is owned by the State Lands Department, and it's really caused the area to not develop as it maybe otherwise would have, in terms of if it had been driven by market forces. What we're dealing with now is in sort of the center of the district, just to the west. If you could point it out, maybe Laura, where Sky Crossing actually is, and that's where the elementary school is being constructed right now. So as we can see, the existing elementary school attendance area, you know, divides that development directly in half. And around that, then you've got some interesting areas, because obviously to the east, you've got Desert Ridge, which has, developed strongly, but has kind of almost ground to a stop while we wait for additional lands to go to the market, as Laura was saying, over on the eastern side of the Desert Trails Elementary Attendance area. And then over to the north, we do have a new development that's coming online called Stone Butte, which is out there in the northwest corner of the district, which is also going to be fueling some higher end housing development into that part of the district. However, the big land holding in the area is what we call a ZERA, and it's that 2 mile by 6 mile wide area that runs all the way across the district. And that has been stymied by infrastructure problems over the last 15 or 20 years. And so we're looking at maybe parts of that starting into development in the next 10 years. But really the name of the game has been Sky Crossing, Stone Butte, and then we'll be shifting back over to the east. And so those are the kind of the growth patterns that we've been looking at. And then on the next slide.
Hey, Rick.
Yes.
This is Jesse. Can I just jump in for 1 second? I just want to make sure everybody on the meet, whether they're on the YouTube or the WebEx, has a little background, because I can't remember if we did a quick intro for you there, Rick. So just so everybody knows, Rick Brammer, obviously, as you can see on the slide, works with Applied Economics and has been assisting us here in the district with demographics, as you probably already figured out. He's very astute on that. So I just wanted to make sure everybody knew who was talking on here. He's somebody who we consult with here within the district. So sorry, Rick, didn't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to make sure everybody knew who you were.
No, that's okay. I appreciate that. So when we kind of focus in on the area at hand, the area immediately around where elementary school number 33 is going to be, we see this rather unusual development pattern. And in that, it's development, and therefore students, those little tiny green dots you see are actually students that are enrolled in a district school, is not evenly distributed. It's sort of checkerboarded, and it's concentrated into individual developments. And so unlike when we do boundary planning work, say south of Bell Road, where you can kind of expect an even distribution, this was not like that at all. And in fact, we had to look at then building blocks, essentially, pieces that could logically be moved. And of course, the first priority is to maintain a walker area around each of the elementary schools. So once you block out those areas and then beginning to look at the other pieces, it tended to limit the options in a way that we don't normally deal with. And there isn't enough people in some of these areas, particularly say Sky Crossing all by itself, community number 1. There will never be enough students in that development by itself to fully support an elementary school. We have to put someone else in there. So you start looking around the edges. So you look over at maybe the village at Aviano and give some relief to Wildfire. For many reasons or another, that just didn't seem like the best option. And then you look at the other places that we actually have people, and you're talking about Desert Peak and Tatum Highlands. And so you're kind of looking to move essentially one of those populations, unless you want to disturb the walkers. And so we're kind of painted into a corner a little bit on the way these boundaries actually fell out in sort of an unusual way. Next slide.
All right, next slide. I'm going to start off with. So this is a new slide for those folks who've seen our presentation before. During our prior study session with the governing board, a request came for more data, particularly as it merged around the questions of whether ES33 would be a K-6 or a K-8 school. So Mr. Brammer pulled some additional data that we might want to consider as we're looking for that related to specifically to 7th and 8th grade students in the area. So I'll turn it over to you, Rick, to kind of walk us through that data.
Yeah, and it's difficult when you're trying to plan for something that's going to last into the future to anticipate what open enrollment patterns are going to be by then. So when we're looking at something like this, typically we focus on just the attendance area. Who's actually likely to live there? And then, we'll get those kids served first. And because some of the earlier parts of development up there, Desert Ridge, are aging at the same time these new developments are finally starting to come on, we're not really anticipating huge amounts of growth. I think probably more growth than our last set of projections reflected, but not huge amounts of growth. And so when you look at then those two, that attendance area that we're talking about, and you look at the 7th and 8th graders, it's basically 578 kids this year. It's probably only going to be about 600 kids, 9 or 10 years from now. But the split is what's interesting, is that the way it would break out is that by far the majority would be in the Mountain Trail attendance area versus what's been proposed for elementary number 33. And so even at what would be sort of build out, or at least what we can plan for at this time, we'd be looking at less than 200 7th and 8th grade students in that kind of a program at elementary number 33. Next.
Okay, so back to me. So these are the current boundaries for elementary schools that would be impacted by the recommendation that the committee made. So pointing out what now seems like a crazy line between Wildfire and Boulder Creek. It was set years ago before Sky Crossing Community was designed. We had no idea what it was going to look like. If everybody remembers the days, communities had nice straight borders to them. So it was here along this 32nd Street alignment. And so just to point out, one of the guiding principles for our community was to keep neighborhoods together. So if you can see here, this little green zone that's in the middle is the Sky Crossing development. And as you see, 32nd Street runs right through the middle of it and actually probably divides a couple homes. And so that was one of the areas that the committee really needed to contend with. So here is the map of the recommendation. So I'm going to point out a couple of things and then we'll move to kind of the next slide. So we do have all of the Sky Crossing community here within the middle of it. And we are, there are some homes to the west side of Pinnacle High School. As you drive in this area, I'm sure you're familiar that you come up the 51. If you take that Black Mountain Parkway exit, it's a pretty major thoroughfare starting to develop through here. So the committee recommended we stick with that thoroughfare through there. Again, there's some areas through here where there aren't streets. So you see here that we talk about the 40th Street alignment. On the west side, we are recommending a 27th Street alignment up to Pinnacle Road. What we're trying to do is just to get to the west side of the Sky Crossing community. So that is an alignment. There isn't actually a street there. And then we do cut across and grab the small portion of this community up here. And it's a 38th Street alignment because, again, they don't like to have straight streets anymore. Makes it difficult for those of us who are making school district boundaries and like straight lines. But here is a little write-up. Let's talk about this. So the elementary recommendation, here's kind of the written description of it. It runs north of the 101 at the Black Mountain Boulevard up to the top of the district, and then runs across over to the western end of the district, encompassing the Desert Peak community, and then runs along Pinnacle Peak and then captures the west side of Sky Crossing, and does encompass the Ridgeview community down there by Pinnacle High School. There aren't a lot of students within there, but they certainly are students within there. So we are recommending that would be the boundary divider for our new elementary school, number 33. And then I'm going to turn us back over to Mr. Brammer, who'll talk about some of the data and what schools would look like in terms of enrollments. Possibly anticipated.
Thank you.
I don't want to commit to too much there, Rick.
Well, and actually it's already changed since these numbers were put together, but the general pattern has not. We are showing, the last 5 years worth of actual data under what would be the current attendance areas and then the recommended attendance areas. And as I say that, at the top of the screen, it says includes open enrollment. So, even though we want to plan first for who lives in the attendance areas, we have so much movement between these campuses, particularly a couple up north, that you have to take that into account when you're doing this kind of planning. So that's what we're looking at is, what the actual enrollment has been in these attendance areas, which is actually obviously the same. And then going forward with the projections, we can see in this projection, at least Boulder Creek getting very, very large with, absorbing half of Sky Crossing plus the new Stone Butte project that's coming in. And the other two basically kind of maintaining their enrollments at this point, although we may be looking at those increase based on some of the new buyer information that we're looking at. But we're looking at not only the trend in the numbers, we're looking at how, what the overall change has been the last 4 years, what we're looking at for the next, 5 years. And then almost, or even more importantly, is then how does attendance relate to how many people live there? So in the case of Boulder Creek, they actually have 70 fewer in 2019, 2020. They had 70 fewer students at the school than lived in the attendance area, versus Wildfire, which had 149 more, versus Fireside, which had 356 students more in its school than in its attendance area. So this is why it's such an important part of the decision, is these are fairly substantial numbers. And we're not looking to see that, this particular action change that pattern all of that much. We're hoping to make Boulder Creek a little bit stronger. These negatives that it's showing here for that 5-year period are just because we're shifting students out of Boulder Creek, Wildfire, and Fireside into the new elementary school. And with the accuracy of the numbers and all the variables we're dealing with, this gives us a very reasonable projection of what future enrollment might look like with the recommended attendance areas. I personally like the fact that Boulder Creek and Wildfire both come in a little on the low side, because if we have more development than we're expecting to have up there, those are the two schools that are going to receive that load. Next.
All right, so I think we're ready to move on to middle school. So let's talk a little bit about our current middle school boundaries. I think this map does a really good job of showing that horseshoe that Dr. handed it to you now, Mr. Brammer was talking about. Here's the horseshoe. I know when I started working for the district and they adopted this boundary, I thought, what in the world have you done? I mean, you know what? It really made sense curricularly. This was a curricular-based decision where these schools on the east and west sides of the district up here used a core knowledge-based curriculum. And so it kind of made sense. And if you recall at the time, there just was not nearly as much traffic up in this area as there is now. There's this island up here at Desert Highlands. Why was it an island? Well, that's because it actually was not a core knowledge. Those students didn't receive core knowledge. So it really made sense for them to come down here with the Explorer folks. And so this is what we have had for many years. As it's evolved over the years, we've seen many students from Greyhawk and Pinnacle Peak here on the east side of the district open enroll to Explorer. So that is one of those open enrollment trends that we did look at as we were making our recommendation. Here is the recommendation of the committee for the new middle school boundaries. Let's kind of walk through the map. As you see, it eliminates the horseshoe, and it does really focus on a division between Mountain Trail Middle School and Explorer Middle School along that Black Mountain Parkway that runs through that middle section there. Talking a little bit more detail, how did we end up with this decision? Let's talk about it a little bit. We felt like the curricular reasons for the horseshoe boundary were just outdated. And so what we did, excuse me, is recommend a boundary that would shift Pinnacle Peak and Greyhawk feeding into Explorer rather than Mountain Trail, and the Sky Crossing community, which is currently split along that crazy 32nd Street dividing line, sending the whole community neighborhood actually over to Mountain Trail Middle School. So that did meet one of the guiding principles in keeping the neighborhood together. So some of the pros they came up with, just Black Mountain Boulevard will only become a more busy street as time goes on. And so just recommending to use that as a natural divider. We felt it did keep our communities and neighborhoods together. It minimizes the transportation that we have driving across the northern end of the horseshoe. And some of the cons is some Skycrosser buyers were led to believe that Explorer was the middle school and that 32nd Street wasn't a dividing line. So we did acknowledge that as part of our thought process. I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Brammer, who will talk to us about some of the numbers that are based off of this divider with a K6 recommendation.
Yes, thank you. So Sunrise, Vista Verde, and Pinnacle Peak were just included basically for reference on this table. The only real change is between Explorer and Mountain Trail. And by moving that boundary, there are, of course, more students than that in the Pinnacle Peak and the Greyhawk areas, but the total impact of changing that boundary is less than 40 students, because only 37 students currently from the area between Scottsdale Road and Pima Road make the decision to make the trip all the way around to Mountain Trail. So essentially the boundary has moved itself, so that whatever change you might make actually wouldn't have any noticeable change in the enrollment patterns as we see them right now at all.
Okay, so let's talk about, this is actually a new slide that we have here, but is part of the work that what the committee did. So the committee was charged at looking with all schools north of the 101, and we did look at the high school. Even though in our prior presentation we didn't have a slide specifically by high school, but we did look at Pinnacle High, and its current demographic projections. And there really was no recommendation by the committee to change the boundaries. The possible feeders are both all very full schools up there, so there really just wasn't a shift. The data indicate that really we don't think there needs to be any change until there's some substantial growth up there and it would warrant a new high school being built. I know there's been a lot of conversation about the Sky Crossing neighborhood being transitioned over to North Canyon High School. I will just say as the person who oversees the transportation department, that clearly does not make sense. So that has never been given any kind of consideration. And really the data is not indicating we need to make a change to Pinnacle High School this time. So with that completes our formal presentation, and we would be happy to turn it over to Dr. Welsh. And I think he's going to kind of lead our discussion and question time.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Felton. And again, if there's any initial questions or discussion from the board, be happy to answer that. If not too, what I can do at this point in time is share a little bit in terms of some of the feedback that we've received from the families up there. So I'll open it up for a moment there. That way, if there are any questions, clarifications that we want to get out there before we get to that piece, I'll open that up. I think that'd be a good time for that.
This is Mrs. Matura. President Greenberg?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I had a question. Back when you were originally looking at the boundary lines for the new elementary school and you moved over to the west, where some of those students are currently boundaried into Boulder Creek.
Boulder Creek.
I'm like losing all my names here. Sorry. There's a road that kind of goes through there that kind of curves through, and instead we went with a straight line. And I was wondering if they kind of had looked at one versus the other when the group was looking at that neighborhood area.
So we did look at that little section that falls right below, is it Desert Mountain? You know, that's just a big wheel, I swear, and they spin the names, right, to come up with it.
Desert Peak Parkway?
Desert Peak Parkway.
Yes.
There is so what we were wanting to grab is that community, which really feeds more to the community north of the parkway versus south of the parkway. So it really is an independent little community within there. If you look at that, the homes actually, there's a neighborhood divider through there. So it is a natural break if you actually go look at it.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah. Thank you very much. And I did just want to reiterate, and you've said it, but that the high school boundaries were not looked at. It's not something that might come up again. Like really, it is planned. It is not planned to be shifted. That was never a thought to move the Sky Crossing neighborhood away from the Pinnacle High School boundaries.
I think it would not be honest to say we didn't look at Pinnacle High School. We did look at Pinnacle's high school and felt that nothing needed to happen.
Okay.
So it's not like we just ignored it and maybe something will come up. We clearly looked at it and didn't feel that anything needed to happen, you know, within the next 10 years to that. And if it is something that come up within the next 10 years, it would be related to rapid growth and development in the community, which would warrant an additional high school.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
And I do want to add to that funky little area south of the parkway. It really, one of the big drivers on that was how to get those students to school. And there's not a direct connection going south, and the transportation folks said we're going to be running buses right through there to go to the new elementary school. And so it would make sense to pick them up and take them to ES 33. So
that makes sense. Thank you very much.
Does any other member of the board have any questions right now? I actually have one. Can we go back to the slide that would show? It's a couple slides back, and it's that one. Yep. The next, there we go.
You're wanting the middle school numbers?
Yes, the middle school
yes,
numbers. Thank you. That's probably what I should have said to start with. Okay, can just walk me through just a little bit. I know Rick was talking about the discussion in terms of the number of students that basically I'm guessing, if I'm remembering correctly, from Pinnacle Peak and Greyhawk, who are still going to Mountain Trail, and then kind of that number would go to Explorer based on the recommendation. How many students from ES 33 are contained within this at this point? I mean, what are the projected numbers with what we know from from Sky Crossing and the other part of ES 33 that we are discussing?
Well, Sky Crossing would fall into the Mountain Trail attendance area.
Right.
So it substantially helps, support those numbers at that school going forward.
Well, I realize that, but I'm looking at, projected 2021 with the current attendance areas and recommended. And if you just look at Mountain Trail, if you look at Explorer versus Mountain Trail, Explorer is higher, Mountain Trail is lower. So how, that's 66 difference just for this school year. Where are those kids from? What's that shift?
Yeah, and you're correct. They all come, those that are making that movement are the ones from Pinnacle Peak and Greyhawk that are actually attending Mountain Trail. There's only, as you said, about 50 or 60 right now, but that number has been dwindling slowly.
Okay, because I thought I thought I'd heard before it was only like about 30, but so I apologize if I'm
I think I was looking out at the 28, 29 numbers.
okay.
Where
Okay.
with all the other changes that happen, by the time you're looking out that far, is really like a 40 student difference.
Okay.
I think I misled you there, and I apologize for that.
Oh, no, that not a problem. Okay, so the numbers we are seeing for Mountain Trail incorporate all of, anybody from elementary 33, the proposed boundaries for elementary 33, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, thanks.
We have the shape of an enrollment curve going through right now where we've had smaller enrollments in the elementary schools, and they're actually starting to stabilize. And now we're seeing that dip move on to the middle schools and to the high schools, which is kind of disguising the amount of growth that, feels like is taking place up there.
Right. Okay. And Rick, do these numbers take Stone Butte into account at all?
No.
Okay.
Actually, they do not. These numbers were done prior to that development being announced.
Okay, but that now
that will add to Mountain
map,
Trail.
that might be happening within the next year or two.
It's definitely happening within the next year or two. I think they're pushing dirt up there right now.
Okay.
So that's really going to happen, and that'll help further support those mountain trail numbers.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I think Jesse will.
Sure. Yeah, so let me dive in a little bit in terms of some of the comments that we've received. So just for everybody's awareness, as we outlined in the public meeting notice and the mailers that went to all the residents within potentially impacted areas, we've been receiving public comments regarding the proposed boundary changes through that submission form on our website at pvschools.net/ES33. And so I believe Ms. Felton's got them up there. There we go. So as part of our open meeting, we wanted to share the names of individuals who have submitted public comments as of, this was as of today at noon. We'll continue to keep that open as we move forward here. And for our next meeting Thursday, of course, we will add to that list any comments that names of individuals for comments that have come in. I also want to point out that we received 2 letters that were really collectively written from the Sky Crossing community, along with some additional backup materials. And so I do want to recognize that. Again, all of these materials have been provided to governing board members ahead of time and reviewed. As a little bit of a summary, so as of noon today, we had received a total of 201 comments. Overall in those comments, there were 7 individuals who supported the proposed boundary recommendations. We had 12 individuals whose comments were neutral regarding those recommendations. And we had 182 comments that were not in favor of those proposed boundary recommendations. And primarily, the main concern that families have been sharing was really those middle school boundaries as it pertains to Explorer and Mountain Trail. Delving a little bit deeper in there, some of the big issues were, again, really just the middle school and some of that discussion on the high school, although, again, I know Ms. Felton has addressed that, there are no changes being proposed to high school. We did receive 86 comments that were requesting specifically that students within the Sky Crossing community attend both Explorer and Pinnacle High School. Again, noting that even though there were no changes to Pinnacle being recommended, there were an additional 47 comments that were specific to just Explorer and asking that families within the Sky Crossing community would be zoned for Explorer. There were also 24 comments that had requested that if students cannot attend Explorer, then they would like to see that Sky Crossing could be a K-8 school and then feed into Pinnacle. Again, noting that there were no changes to Pinnacle. There were 10 along those same lines that just did not include that high school component that's requested that if students could not attend Explorer, then Sky Crossing should be K-8. And then you get into just a handful of some other comments out there. There were 4 comments that specifically asked about students at Wildfire being grandfathered in so they could then complete their feeder alignment through Explorer and Pinnacle. In terms of the K-8, K-6, again, notwithstanding the comments that were really specifically directed towards if the school community, if the Sky Crossing community didn't feed into Explorer, there were 2 comments that specifically asked that Sky Crossing be a K-8 school and feed into Pinnacle. There were 2 that just expressed that they wanted Sky Crossing to be K-8, and on the opposite side, there were 2 that specifically asked for Sky Crossing to be a K-6 school. And so I think you see in that, and I think too in some of the data that Mr. Brammer shared, primarily I think the biggest concern from the Sky Crossing community was really not the K-8, K-6 argument as much as really just a desire to remain at Explorer there. Some of the other common themes and questions that were in the comments that I do want to share and address. Again, we talked about it before. While there were no changes to the boundaries of Pinnacle recommended, 124 of the 201 comments included that concern. So once again, just reiterating, affirming, Pinnacle High School remains the home schools for students up there in the Sky Crossing community. Again, outside of those 2 comments, the support for a potential K-8 option really was limited to those who were seeking that option only if Explorer was not the zone middle school. Couple other things that were shared that, again, I just want to make sure that we put out there. There was some feedback from families indicating that Explorer was closer to Mountain Trail. Again, just as a clarification, if you're going from where the Sky Crossing Community Center is, Explorer is actually 2 miles from the Sky Crossing Community Center by foot if students were walking to school. Again, we wouldn't actually have students walk 2 miles, but walking by foot. And Mountain Trail is actually 1.7 miles. So ironically enough, Mountain Trail is slightly closer, although it probably depends on where exactly one's house is in the community. So they're both pretty equal in distance. And then the last thing I think that was important, we also saw in some of the comments some concerns about the performance of the different schools. So I just want to make sure, again, just really for the record, that everybody's aware. The information regarding the performance of Mountain Trail and Explorer on the most recent state letter grade system, which was last school year for the 2018-2019 school year, which, by the way, will remain the same letter grades because, of course, we had no state assessments this year due to COVID-19. By those most recent letter grades available, Mountain Trail actually was just under 1.5 points off of its B letter grade. And Explorer Middle School did earn a B letter grade last year. So again, not trying to sway anybody one way or the other, but I just wanted to make sure that those facts are out there. So that's I think a pretty good flyover in terms of the comments. And again, I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody when I say we really do appreciate all of the comments that were sent in and received, as well as I really appreciate the work by a number of individuals up there to really aggregate some of that feedback together and kind of try to provide a cohesive letters from the community in terms of what the perspectives are.
Thank you, Dr. Welsh. Does any member of the board have any, now with all of that information, have any questions or comments?
President Greenberg, it's Susan Matura. I don't know if you can see me.
I cannot, so thank you. Take it away.
Okay, a couple of things. One, I just wanted to explain there's a lot of confusion about where middle schools, how they are boundaried into and sending into the high schools. And that in PV district, we really look more at where elementary schools are, and that determines, those boundaries are what determines where they go to high school versus the middle school where they go to and going to high school. Is that confirmed for me? That we look at the elementary schools are the ones actually zoned to high schools. Middle schools are not specifically zoned to high schools. So, so we have students at, like right now, we have students at Mountain Trail who are allocated to go to both Pinnacle and to North Canyon. Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
And then also I know there was some confusion because there are schools that are east of Scottsdale Road, and so are technically in Scottsdale. And we have a few schools that are in Scottsdale. And just to let people know, because it's confusing if you're not from here, how districts boundaries are made, and that they don't follow along the city lines at all. And in fact, Paradise Valley Unified School District does not encompass any of Paradise Valley, the town of Paradise Valley. So our boundaries really do go all the way over to Pima. So when we're talking about the schools in Scottsdale, those really are our PV USD schools. And so I think that's some confusion, just because if you haven't been here for a very long time and been used to the way that schools are, then you think, well, boundaries would make sense to go with cities, and that doesn't work that way here. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Very similar to the 32nd Street alignment running through the middle of Sky Crossing. Those boundaries were developed before, obviously, there was anyone living anywhere. It may have been before the town of Paradise Valley. So yes, they don't necessarily line up pretty.
I think Mrs. Bacon and then Dr. Skidmore.
Okay, thanks. I wonder if I know that the families that are living in Sky Crossing right now, or in the process of buying a home or building a home in Sky Crossing, are very concerned about the fact that they were told Explorer is their middle school. And I think that's a valid concern. And so I'm wondering if we can have some sort of conversation around grandfathering those families in before a certain date, or if they live there by, I don't know, the end of the school year, or they purchase by the end of the school year, we can grandfather them into Explorer, and after that, it'll be Mountain Trail. I think there's some confusion with the development company and the information that they're providing as well. That would give us some time to work with them to give them the information they need, and they can change their marketing materials and whatever they need to do. But that's just something I've been thinking about as I've been reading letters and having conversations about this. And I just wanted to throw that out there. I mean, we've done it before many times with other boundary changes. I think it's worked pretty well in the past. So I just wanted to throw it out as an option.
Thank you, Mrs. Bacon. How about Dr. Skidmore, and then maybe we can jump in.
With all due respect, Mrs. Bacon is spot on. And I can recall the issue of Sky Crossing boundaries was discussed over 2 years ago. And at that time, the district informed the developer that the boundaries had not been set. And prior to COVID, members across the Sky Crossing community pointed out they bought their homes under the developer's brochure that proclaims Explorer as their home school, their home middle school, which I verified and was indeed true. Now, I have no interest in suing the developer for printing incorrect information. But if Sky Crossing community believed that they would be sent to Explorer, we should honor it. Secondly, with all due respect to Mr. Brammer, in the times of open enrollment, over the next 5 years, this is going to mitigate itself. I've been around the block a long time, and I suspect by 2022, 2 years from now, folk will be clamoring to enroll someplace else in a middle school. Realizing if they choose self-contained gifted classes or all of the new STEM programs and specialty programs planned for mountain trails, this will be a no-brainer. I don't see any reason to debate this any longer. Let people go where they want to go, and let's move on.
Thank you, Dr. Skidmore. Mrs. Case, do you have any? Yep, there we go.
Yes, I do have a comment. Because of the confusion which has gone on and people have bought homes because of misinformation from the developer and information, questions answered, we don't know where the answers came from, but I believe that we need to grandfather some of these people in. We can figure out a date, how long we should grandfather them in. I don't know what that date should be, but I think we need to let people choose, and then I believe that things will evolve as Mountain Trail changes and grows with a new principal there, who's fabulous, and he was former principal to my child. But I believe that we need to let these community members go to where they thought they were going to go. And then as things evolve with the open enrollment that we've enjoyed for so long, that people will end up going different places as things evolve. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mrs. Case. Mrs. Bacon, I see you have unmuted again. Do you have a comment?
Yes, I just have one more thing to add, and I would be remiss if I didn't do this. I want to make sure that I say this because I think the best way for parents to know where the best school is for their child is to look at the whole school and not the letter grade. So I would implore all parents to look at the community that is in a school, the culture that's in a school. And so I just want to make sure that we are clear that we don't believe one of our schools is better than another of our schools, because that is not the case. They all have different cultures. They all have different, despite the letter grades. Letter grades are about one test on one day for one student, and each individual student could be experiencing different things on that day. So I want to make sure that people know it's just a snapshot in time. It is not about how good the school is, how good the teachers are, how good the principal is, how good the students are. That's not what a letter grade is. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Mrs. Bacon. Yeah, I wanted to jump in on that as well, as someone who open enrolled her younger son. Our older son went to the schools for where we are boundaried, but when it came time for a younger son who's a different individual and has different needs than our older son, we looked at different schools, and he was open enrolled for middle school and for high school at different schools than his older brother. And those decisions were the best for each of them, and they both, excelled wonderfully at the schools at which they were at. So I absolutely support what Mrs. Want to reiterate what Mrs. Bacon said. It is. There are many factors that should go into deciding where you enroll your children. If you have that opportunity, if you are able to consider open enrollment for your students, and there are some provisos that go along with that, including transportation, et cetera. But it is a long-standing tradition in this district that when we do look at boundary changes, that we also consider grandfathering. And quite honestly, once again, my family was, that was part of something we went through when our older son was in elementary school and boundaries were changed. And first it was going to be a very swift change for everybody. And then after discussions like these, and I'm not sure, but I think that experience was one of the reasons the district has more of a process, that the state and the district have more of a process in place. But you know, at that point, we started grandfathering, and you know, for that particular school, and I think that's something that we have held on to as we've gone through this process. Because one of the points that Mrs. Felton made in the beginning is that quite a lot of this, you know, although we do not prioritize those different policies or different parameters that she talked about, balancing enrollment is something that we do have to look at. It doesn't serve to have two schools that could serve the same number of children, same number of students, and have one of them be twice as large as the other. Then you get perhaps overcrowding in one and under service in the other if there's not, you know, quite enough enrollment to perhaps have the same array of courses, et cetera, et cetera. So we do have to take those sorts of, you know, factors under consideration as well. But it really does seem to me that I think we're all on the same page that, you know, either we consider grandfathering or some other, you know, way to do this such that the Sky Crossing community at this point would be going to explore if that is where they choose. And, you know, down the road that may be different. And it's either going to be a grandfather situation or we set boundaries that way. But I think if we do the latter, we'd be coming back pretty quickly and having this discussion again in a way that would probably feel a little bit like whiplash. So those are my thoughts. I'm not seeing, does anybody else have, I'm not seeing anybody's mic off.
It's Mrs. Matura again. Sorry,
But I don't
you can't see me.
you. I know. I don't know why. I'm going to pass it on over to you.
So I definitely appreciate the idea of looking into grandfathering for these residents who were told something. And if we are able to make good on that, I think that'd be a really nice way to be working with our new school and our new community. So I appreciate looking into that option. And also to reiterate what my colleagues have said is that, you know, each school does offer something so different. And while some people really think that, you know, a bigger school is the better way to go, that a smaller school environment gives you different opportunities and to really be thoughtful of all that. And I think there'll be plenty of time for residents to really get to know the schools and get to know their options. And I appreciate that opportunity for them.
Thank you, Mrs. Matura. Does anybody else have anything?
Mrs. Greenberg.
Yes, Mrs. Bacon.
Thank you. I think the other thing that I want to kind of point out is we very much respond to our family's wishes in terms of many things. And I'm grateful that they provided letters to us. I think that I have been thinking about this since the original conversation that we had about the boundaries. That seems like so long ago, but it wasn't that long ago. And this is something that I felt like was going to happen when we talked about it back in, was it March, February, something like that?
Yeah, I believe it was March, yes.
Yeah. So I think I just want our community to know that we do want to listen, and we do listen to what our community has to say, and we're just appreciative of the information that they give us and the input they give us, and it really does make a difference.
Thank you, Mrs. Bacon. Dr. Skidmore?
I want to leave you with one last comment. Yes, I've had some health challenges here a few months ago, and I am dreadfully sorry tonight that I cannot be in a public meeting speaking with all of you. but I have heard your voice, and I will continue to hear your voice.
Thank you, Dr. Skidmore. Anybody else? Again, as Sue and Julie just said, and Susan, I think we've all been thinking a lot about this. I really do appreciate the fact that so many members of the community have reached out, that are passionate about their students' education. I mean, that's what this shows me, and I think that is extraordinary and not something that we always see, in terms of that passion. And I think, I reiterate, I think we've heard what you've had to say, and we understand, because we're all parents, and we all have wanted to do what's best for our students as well. And with that, Dr. Welsh, is there anything else?
I'll just briefly mention again, for those who may not have already provided feedback, our form is going to stay open, obviously, for our next meeting, which of course is Thursday, the 27th, also at the same time, 6:30 virtual meeting. All that information, of course, is on our website there. And yeah, again, thank you to everybody for the feedback on that. We really do appreciate that. And yeah, I think that's all we've got on this one.
Okay, so if no member of the board has any other comments, Dr. Skidmore, may I have a motion to adjourn this
So moved, Greenberg.
Thank you, Dr. Skidmore. All in favor, please unmute yourself and say aye.
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 Okay, Mrs. Chisholm, I think we're okay on not doing a roll call vote. So at 7:38 on 8:25, we have unanimous vote to adjourn, and we will be back 2 nights from now, same bat time, for our virtual meeting, 6:30. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.